everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shayne. I write romance and romantic fiction, and I thought that since I just started my Booktube channel that I would go ahead and do the Booktube Newbie Tag. So let's get right into the questions. Question number 1, why did you start this channel? To talk about books. I don't have that many people that I can talk about books with, if any. My friends don't really read that much or don't read the same books that I do. And I tried to join book clubs, a couple of book clubs. I joined one before the pandemic, and that book club just didn't last very long. It lasted maybe a couple, 3 months, and then it just fizzled out. Funny story, it fizzled out on the month that we were doing the book that I had picked. So, we would take turns picking books. And I picked a book after, I think, the 3rd time. I picked a romance. It was, I think, Jasmine Guillory's first book. And I was so excited that we were going to be able to talk about this book. And then I show up for the meeting, because the meetings were being held at the library. I show up at the library and I don't see any of the other people in the group. And so I'm kind of like waiting. I go up to the library, the front desk, and I'm like, isn't there a book club meeting here? And they look it up and they're like, oh yeah, there is, right there in that room. The room was completely dark. And she's like, you're the first one to show up. Well, it turns out I was the only one to show up. The host of the book club didn't even show up. I sat there waiting for about 15-20 minutes, finally accepting the fact that nobody was coming. I drove home and I just felt so completely disappointed and lonely. I actually got sick to my stomach. Finally got in touch with the host, because it was through Meetup, and I contacted the host through Meetup and was like, did I miss the date? Weren't we having a book club meeting? And the host said that they were having they had a big crisis that day and had completely forgotten about book club. But they were like, well, you and I can get together and talk about the book since we both read it. Never heard from them again. So that was the end of that. And then after the pandemic, actually a little bit of backstory, a little complicated little twist here. During the pandemic, during the summer of 2021, I got really sick. And one of the long-term effects of that sickness is that I have chronic fatigue and increased migraines and a couple other things that make life not the same as it was for me before I got sick. And I found a book club because I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. I had been cooped up in my house pretty much by myself for 2 years. And I'm like, I want to try to get out and meet people again now that things are opening up again. And I found a book club, very active. All the meetings had a lot of people. I went to that book club for several months. And I had to stop that too, because I just found that my fatigue is so chronic that I would end up basically being wiped out for 2 days after book club. It was held during the weekday. In the evening, it was 2 hours long. I would find that after an hour of intense talking and yakety yak with other people, that I would just be drained. It would just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, I need to go home now. But it was always at a restaurant, and it's just usually takes another 30 minutes after you realize you want to go to close out the tab and say goodbye to everybody. And then I would be driving home like a zombie. And I'm like, I probably shouldn't be driving. And then there was one book club where it was just like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And it was one that I really wanted to go to. It was on a day that I had a lot of work to do. So that was problem number 1. I was already compromised energy-wise. But I was determined to go because we were discussing Viola Davis's memoir. And I'm like, I am going to get to this meeting if it kills me. Well, it dang near did. I was so exhausted after that meeting that I came home and I didn't even have the energy to stand at the bathroom counter and brush my teeth. I literally was huddled in a corner of my living room like this, trying to brush my teeth. And that was when I realized I can't do the book club anymore. So then it was after that that I found Booktube. And I'm like, oh, I started to get jealous of all these people who had channels and were talking about books with each other. And I'm like, I want to be a part of that community. I want to be able to talk about books again. And it's a way to talk about books without that fatigue element to it. So Next question number 2. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to BookTube? Well, I like romance and I like romantic fiction, obviously, because I write that genre. I also really like literary fiction and just all things literary world in general. So I think I can bring like those two elements of the book world together and talk about like the fun romantic spicy stuff, but also talk about, some literary things, some literary themes that I really resonate with. Also, because I am a writer, I will probably geek out once in a while about things like character arc and plot device and story tropes and archetypes and all of that good stuff. And also, I will be talking about books that I love or books that had a really profound impact on me or books that really impact or affect my writing. So I won't be like doing book ratings or reviewing books that I didn't finish or didn't like. It'll just be books that I love or really want to talk about. And hopefully maybe even spotlight some authors that not all of you would know about. Let's see, question number 3. What are you most excited for about this channel? To be a part of this book community and to find other book lovers to talk about books with. That is what I'm looking forward to. Next question. Why do you love reading? I love reading because it is an escape and it's also it helps with loneliness. I actually started reading as a kid, like reading a lot, because I was lonely and didn't have any friends. I know that sounds dramatic. Here's the actual story of what happened. There were kids in my neighborhood that I would play with. It was kind of a funny setup because my mom and I were definitely on the pretty low end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And we lived in this apartment that was basically a house that had been converted into like 4 or 5 other apartments. And it was in a very well-off neighborhood. So all the other houses were big, and it was usually like, 2-parent households. Usually only one parent had to work because they made enough money. Houses were big, everybody had like 1 or 2 cars. So we were kind of like really basically a poor family living in a very wealthy neighborhood. And I did find some neighborhood kids to play with. Actually, one of them had sought me out, had seen me playing by myself in front of my house and asked her mom to introduce her to me so we could be friends. And I thought that was really wonderful, but something happened at some point. I don't know why. The group expanded, that turned out that the group of friends was bigger than the first girl who came to talk to me. Anyway, as I started playing with them more, something happened and they just decided that they didn't like me. And I remember this very clearly, that when I went to join the group at one of their houses, they basically said, we don't want you here. And I was just shocked. And I said, why don't you want me here? And they're like, because you spoil all the fun. And I literally didn't even know I couldn't even comprehend what I was hearing, honestly. And I said, what? Like I didn't hear them? And they all kind of looked at each other because they were like, oh, this is awkward. And then they all sang in unison, loud enough so that there was no mistaking, you spoil all the fun. And I don't actually remember what happened after that. But I do remember that shortly after that, my mom, I think she got wind of this. There was also another kid who joined the group who targeted me, who liked to do things to terrorize me and make me scared and make me feel ostracized. So my mom got wind of this and she's like, yeah, you're not playing with those bitches anymore. Actually, she didn't say bitches. She was a lot more eloquent. She was like, you're not playing with those sadistic little brats anymore. So, and even then, even with all of the trauma they were causing me, I was like, but then I won't have anybody to play with. And she's like, I don't care. You're not playing with those kids. So I started reading because I was so lonely, just stuck in the apartment by myself, not able to play with any of the other kids in the neighborhood because they didn't want to play with me. And so I started reading, and that was way better than hanging out with those kids, because the characters in the books were my friends, and they were nice to each other. And that was what was missing from my childhood, so I found that in books instead. So that was how I started. That was how I got into reading, and why I loved reading so much, and still do. All right, what books or series got you into reading? The first series that got me into reading was the Peter Rabbit series by Beatrix Potter, because that book, the Tale of Peter Rabbit, is the book that my mom taught me to read on. So after that book, I was like, oh, there's other books in this series, let me check those out. I also really got into, kind of renewed my love for reading, or got into a new series when I was in elementary school, which was the Nancy Drew series. There was a girl in one of my classes who was, back then we would say probably precocious. She was more advanced, as in she was very outgoing. She was very comfortable with herself and comfortable with the other kids. She was very smart. She was kind of a leader, but she was also not at all a domineering personality. She was just really nice and liked people, and was like, oh, I think this would be really cool, let's do this. And she would like ask the teacher, hey, can I read this book that I'm reading to the class, so that she would be reading to the class instead of the teacher. And it was Nancy Drew books. So she would read to the class from these books, and she was a peer. So we were like, oh, we want to check out these books. So that's kind of how I got into Nancy Drew. And I really loved mystery series for a long time because of that series. And then the next series that I really got into at a younger age, when I was a young adult, was of course Judy Blume's books. Her books had a profound influence on me. I'll never forget when Forever came, when the girls found out about, one of the girls at the school got a hold of Forever, and it just spread like wildfire. We would be out on the playground going, ooh, did you get to this part? It was it just felt so fun and taboo, and it was like, felt like we were kind of the cool girls, because we kind of knew that we were reading something that was a little bit more adult, but we were curious, and we were starting to have questions and start to kind of, some of us were already maturing into that teenage phase of life. So we were kind of like learning about things ahead. We felt like we were learning about things ahead of other kids, because we were cool enough and inquisitive enough to be reading these books. Let's see, next question. What questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? How do you do your vlogs? I did my first vlog for my last video, and it was so challenging for me. I would just be stressing out, like, how do I get these angles? It was hard for me to break out of just doing my normal thing and being like, oh, that's right, I need to talk about this book. And I found it challenging to find the right angle, to get the phone set up right. And then I would look at the footage and be like, oh, that sucks, that's not interesting. And then I would film it over again. Anyway, and I watch other people's vlogs, and they look so natural and they look so fun. And when I would try to do it, it didn't seem natural or easy, and it was really time consuming. So that's what I would ask. How do you actually go about vlogging? Let's see, what challenges do you think starting a booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I would say editing, which if you watch my videos, you will notice that they are not heavily edited. And that part of that is because I have found that I'm finding that when I edit for a long period of time, I will get a gnarly migraine. So I won't be editing as much as I probably should. And of course, the other challenge is just feeling like you're speaking into the void, which I was already doing anyway before I joined Booktube, so I really probably shouldn't be too concerned about that. Let's see here. When did you start reading? I started reading pretty early, pre-kindergarten, because my mom taught me to read before I started school. And that, I think that was an amazing thing that she did, because it really gave me leverage. It gave me a head start so that I entered the school system already knowing that I was smart and could do something. And, things came up as I went through as I progressed through the school system that really challenged my sense of self, and it really challenged my self-confidence and my belief in myself and my self-esteem. But I think because I knew how to read at an early age, that I always had that confidence, no matter what a teacher who didn't like me was telling me, or no matter what the other kids were saying, no matter what was happening, if I was struggling in a certain subject, I always knew I am a smart, capable individual, even though these other things are happening, because I had that sort of, groundwork of knowing how to read before I even started school. And I will always be grateful to my mom for teaching me how to read. And I'll never forget, actually, the first time I was able to read a book from beginning to end without help from my mom. I remember that experience so clearly. We were sitting, so my mom and I were on public assistance when I was younger, and there was a lot of sitting around in welfare offices waiting for someone to help you. And that's another reason why I loved reading, because I could escape all of the boredom and tension. There's nothing like having a parent who is stressed out about whether they're going to get help to feed their kid. Like, kids pick up on that. And so I could kind of blot all that out by reading. And it was in an office waiting for assistance that I finished a book beginning to end. And it was just the most incredible feeling. Like, wow, mastering a skill, learning how to do something, and being able to do it on your own and take that into your life was just an incredible experience that I will never forget, and has served me well, I think, throughout my life. Okay, next question. Where do you read? I actually mostly read nowadays because I'm home most of the time. I work from home. I do have chronic fatigue and severe anxiety, so it's hard for me to just say, oh, I'm going to go to a coffee shop today. No, that's a whole thing to just do that. So I usually end up reading at home, either tucked into the nook of my couch or at the kitchen table. Okay, next question. What kind of books do you like to read? I like to read romance, and the spicier the better. I love spicy books. I love erotic books. I love romantic fiction. I really I've gotten into thrillers. I've been really enjoying Lisa Jewell's books. What else do I like? I like literary fiction, as I said before. I also like to read memoirs. I've really been getting into memoirs the last few years, celebrity memoirs. You can get a lot of insight into the human condition and to what makes people tick by reading memoirs. And I just love learning about how other people learned about something, how they got fired up about something, even like, where they grew up and stuff like that. I always feel in a lot of ways kind of like disconnected from the idea of like, my great-grandfather or whatever started this business and now I'm doing this. Like that sort of connection was kind of severed in my life. So learning about what other people do for a living and how they got to do what they're doing now, or how they got to live where they're living now, is just fascinating to me. Okay. So that actually, what are we already at the end? We're at the end. That's the end of all the questions. So thank you for tuning in. And if you are still watching this video, let me know what kind of books you like to read. And if you too are a newbie booktuber, say hi. All right, that's it. I'll see you next time.